3 days after the birth, my husband finally arrived, but he wasn't alone. He walked in with a woman I didn't recognize. I was stunned and struggled to find my voice. "Who is she?" My husband's smile was unsettling as he responded, "This is my girlfriend, soon to be my wife." "What do you mean by that?" "I'm done with you." "What?" The woman stepped forward and introduced herself. "I'm Elizabeth. I'm 25 and work for a company. John just proposed to me. We first met in high school and began dating in our freshman year. We had a brief breakup during our senior year, but after graduating college and going our separate ways, we reconnected at a reunion with old classmates. When we reconnected as adults, my perception of him shifted once more. We spent a lot of time together, rekindling our relationship. 3 years into our renewed romance, he proposed. "Elizabeth, I will love you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" His words touched me deeply, and I said yes. Our new life together as a married couple brought me immense joy. Even though we both had demanding jobs and only saw each other in the evenings during the weekdays, I cherished our time together. The fact that we could spend the nights together, without the hassle of constantly moving between our homes, made me incredibly happy. Back in high school, neither of us knew how to cook. However, living on our own in college gave us the chance to hone our skills. By the time we were together, we had each become quite proficient in the kitchen, which allowed us to share household responsibilities and enjoy a well-balanced life. My husband's specialty was fried foods, and he excelled at it. Since I'm not as skilled with frying, I was grateful that he was happy to take on that task for me. In contrast, I excelled at cooking Japanese dishes, like simmered vegetables. My husband would often praise my cooking, appreciating the perfect balance of flavors. Not too rich, not too bland. I envisioned a future where we continue to support each other and live happily together. 1 year into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. Overjoyed, I shared the news with my husband immediately. "John, I'm pregnant." His eyes widened in shock. "Really?" "Yes, it's true." For a moment, he just stared at me, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. "John, oh my God, I'm going to be a father." He finally snapped out of his daze. "Wow, your reaction was a bit delayed. You really caught me off guard." "I'm just so excited." "Yes, I'm excited too. If we're going to have a baby, we'll need to give it our all." My husband was thrilled about the news of my pregnancy, and I looked forward to raising a child together with him. At first, he was very concerned about my well-being. "Elizabeth, make sure to take it easy, okay? If you're finding it tough, don't hesitate to quit your job." "I'd appreciate that, but I plan to work until my maternity leave begins." "All right, I'll handle the housework." "Thank you." Thanks to his unwavering support and dedication, I was able to rest well despite the morning sickness. As I entered a more stable phase of pregnancy, the delivery date drew nearer. However, I noticed that my husband began coming home later and later. "Did you work late again today?" "Yes, I've been delegating tasks to my coworkers. Now that you're in a stable phase, I wanted to make sure I returned the favor to the company for letting me leave on time." "I see. So you went out of your way to come home despite working overtime." "Exactly. Your well-being is the most important thing." "But I've been off work for 2 months. I don't want to be out of a job after the baby arrives." "That's a valid concern. I'm a bit anxious about being home alone, but if that's the case, I understand. Maybe I'll stay at my parents' house during my maternity leave." My husband nodded in agreement, looking visibly relieved. "That's great. Then I can work overtime without worrying. I'll miss seeing you until after the baby is born, but I'm grateful for the support I'll get from my parents at home." So, as soon as my maternity leave began, I moved back to my parents' house. It felt so much easier to be in a familiar environment without the burden of household chores. Having my mother nearby gave me a comforting sense of security. However, there was one thing that troubled me. My husband had been slow to respond to my messages. Previously, no matter how busy he was, he always replied within the day. Even during my morning sickness, he would respond quickly, even while at work. But now I often didn't receive a reply until the next day, and sometimes even 2 days later. When he did respond, his messages felt curt and less warm than before. The other day, I texted him to check if he was still busy at work and reminded him not to overwork himself. His reply was a brief, "Yeah." Not being able to see him in person made me anxious about his lack of response. However, since I'm pregnant, I decided it was best not to let it get to me. I resolved to give him some space and focus on staying positive by planning for the baby's arrival. I had been busy buying a lot of baby items. "Oh, Dad, you're buying so much. It's important to make sure the baby is safe and comfortable. You're really excited about your first grandchild. And you're the one constantly asking the shop assistants for advice." "Thank you, Mom and Dad." My parents were eagerly anticipating the arrival of our child. I managed to stay positive despite my husband's slow responses, and now my due date had arrived. I sent him a message letting him know that today was the day and asked him to be ready to come to the hospital as soon as he heard from me. However, he didn't even read the message. Maybe he's just caught up at work. He knew my due date was approaching, so he could have been a bit more attentive. As my labor pains began, we headed to the hospital. The moment I had been waiting for was finally here. With no time to call my husband myself, I asked my mother to leave a voicemail informing him that I was about to give birth. Despite this, he didn't show up, even as night fell, and he didn't return any of my calls. Ended up on the delivery table without him. Birth was more difficult and prolonged than I had anticipated as the umbilical cord was wrapped around my baby's neck. The delivery was far from easy, and my baby was born nearly a day after contractions began. However, as soon as I held my baby girl in my arms and looked into her tiny face, all my exhaustion and pain seemed to vanish instantly. She was truly beautiful. "You worked so hard to come into the world, didn't you?" I briefly said goodbye to my baby and then lay back to rest, feeling completely drained from the long hours of labor. Later, I woke up in my hospital bed to find my mother keeping watch over me in the room. "Are you feeling better?" "Yes, I'm doing pretty well." "I'm glad to hear that." "Mom, what's wrong? You don't look well." "I haven't heard from John since you went into labor." "Really? What on earth is he doing? We've already had the baby." I was furious. Why hadn't he come to the hospital? After I sent him a message saying the baby had been born, he replied several hours later, saying he could come to the hospital the day after tomorrow. Why can't he prioritize coming here? I tried to stay positive and focus on the birth, but now that the baby is here, I can't keep my feelings in check. Why isn't he here with us now, for his own child's birth? He should be flying in. Is his job so strict that they won't let him leave? I channeled all my frustration into the message I sent him, but he only read it without responding. What is going on? He was so thrilled when I told him I was pregnant. Why does he seem so indifferent now? My parents were outraged by his unreasonable behavior. My father vowed to give him a stern talking to the next time he saw him. 3 days after the birth, my husband finally showed up, but he wasn't alone. He arrived with an unfamiliar woman, leaving me speechless with shock. "You seem to be doing well. Then why did you send me messages that made it sound like you were in a crisis?" Huh. Not only had he come with a stranger, but his cold demeanor was also a shock. I was taken aback, struggling to find my voice. "Who is this woman?" I managed to ask, "Who is this woman?" And my husband responded with a smile. "She's my girlfriend, actually my future wife." "What?" The woman beside him chimed in. "Oh. What do you mean by future wife?" She laughed and playfully tapped my husband on the shoulder, saying, "Oh, this is so embarrassing." "What do you mean?" "Don't you understand? It means that you and I are divorced." "What? Wait a minute, are you saying you were having an affair?" Adultery doesn't quite capture it. It's more that I found someone new to love, and we ended up together. I struggled to make sense of his words. I'm just tired of you. You know, men are drawn to women who take care of themselves. With that, my husband wrapped his arms around the woman beside him. Are you implying that I wasn't taking care of myself? You've put on weight and looked bloated because you were at home all the time. I was lying in bed because of pregnancy and morning sickness. Gaining weight during pregnancy is normal, and that's why I started seeing someone else. I still wanted to maintain romantic feelings for my wife, but those feelings have faded. I've had enough. Can you just get a divorce and leave? I'll go without you having to ask. With that, my husband and the woman left the hospital room. He didn't even glance at our child's face or inquire about the baby's gender, which made it clear that he no longer cared. It hit me hard to realize that I would be a single mother. The weight of it all, coming right after giving birth, was overwhelming. As I was grappling with my emotions, the door to the hospital room opened. I was taken aback when my husband and mother-in-law walked into the hospital room. Why are you here? Elizabeth, I'm so sorry for what my son has put you through, she said, clearly distressed. It turned out that my mother-in-law had encountered my husband and his lover in the parking lot. After questioning him about the situation, he gave her the same explanation he had given me. She told me she sent the woman away and then confronted my husband, insisting he come to the hospital with her. What are you thinking? You have an affair while your wife is pregnant and then you ask for a divorce. Your father would have been furious if he knew about this. My father-in-law passed away a few years ago. I didn't have a choice. She came into my life and I fell in love with her. How could I have ended up married to someone like you? I see you care for her a lot. Elizabeth, do you still want to stay married to John? My mother-in-law asked, but I had already made my decision. No, I want a divorce. Well, that's your choice. My husband's face brightened at my response. Then everything is settled. Then you'll need to pay alimony for your infidelity and child support. What? Absolutely. You committed adultery and now you need to take responsibility. If you divorce Elizabeth, I'll stop supporting you financially. What? You can't be serious. Supporting me? What do you mean by supporting me? What? Elizabeth wasn't aware of this. His income was so low that he asked me to send him a few $1,000s each month. He claimed it was to maintain his lifestyle with you. I had no idea. Even though my husband's salary was low, my higher income covered the shortfall. In reality, he was using the money from my mother-in-law to fund his affair. This revelation pushed my mother-in-law to her breaking point. I'm going to demand repayment for every cent I've given you. I'm severing all ties with you. Don't ever come back to my house. No, wait. Elizabeth, I'm sorry for all this trouble. I'll arrange for a top-notch divorce attorney for you, and you can claim as much money as you're entitled to. Thank you very much. With that, my mother-in-law left the hospital with my husband. I pursued alimony and child support from my ex-husband, and I also sought alimony from his mistress. My husband, now deep in debt and abandoned by my mother-in-law, found himself cut off from financial support. His mistress left him as well, since he no longer had any money to offer. He now spends his days struggling to pay alimony and child support while living in poverty. I have no intention of letting my child have any contact with him. My goal is for him to live with regret while fulfilling his financial obligations. As for me, I've returned to work as a single mother, dedicating myself to both my job and raising my child. I continue to stay in touch with my mother-in-law, sharing updates and photos of my grandchild with her. Despite the pain my ex-husband caused, I'm grateful for the positive outcome of meeting my wonderful mother-in-law. His behavior during my pregnancy was reprehensible, and while I wish there could be harsher consequences for him, I'm relieved that his mistress decided to move on from him. I hope that you and your daughter find joy and happiness together in the future.